Good afternoon folks, welcome to Benidorm and welcome to the launch of Honda's CB1000GT. This is hot off the press, literally. We only caught sight of this bike for the first time at EICMA a couple of weeks ago and we've already been flown out here to Benidorm to come and ride it today. And it's a very exciting bike for Honda because Honda have got a lot of bikes in the touring category, they've got a lot of bikes in the adventure touring category, and they've got a lot of bikes that kind of merge the two. But in terms of the all-out sports tourer category with long travel suspension and this comfortable riding position, there isn't really a lot in the Honda range that has done that for quite a while. So this is really a very interesting and very exciting bike. I'm going to obviously take you through everything about it, what's new, what's the same as the Honda Hornet, and then we're going to talk about how it's performed out here on these beautiful roads that we've been riding out here in Benidorm. So I'm going to start at the top. This is, as it sits in front of me here, £11,999. So that gets you the bike, a Hornet derived and Fireblade derived engine. You get the heated grips, you get the panniers, you get the adjustable screen, the cruise control, the IMU control. All of that good stuff is there for you at £11,999. What Honda are pitching this bike as is a 360-degree offering for people. So really what they're saying is this is a bike for people who want a sports bike or they want a sports naked, but they also want a tourer. And they want something that's got comfort, it's got luggage carrying capacity, and it's got room for two people. So what have we got? What do you get as standard? Well, you get the adjustable screen, which is 81mm height adjustable on that one. You get self-cancelling indicators, you get the TFT, you get 147 bhp from that CB1000 engine down there and 75 pounds-foot of torque. So the performance figures of this thing are kind of right where they need to be in that sort of middleweight sports touring segment. They're kind of right where they need to be. What is really big news about this bike though is the Showa EERA suspension, which is the first time that Honda have introduced that semi-active electronically adjusted suspension to anything with an inline four-cylinder engine and anything that is this sporty, which is very exciting, and that is a real big talking point. I'm going to come onto it a little bit later on. Obviously it's a sports tourer, so you're going to want protection from the elements, and what Honda have done with their design teams in Italy and also at the factory in Japan is they have used CFD, computational fluid dynamics, to like hone the fairing, the bodywork and the screen of the bike to try and keep you out of the weather and the wind as much as possible, which is absolutely brilliant. Chassis wise, we've got a frame which is derived from the CB1000 Hornet, but it's not the same, and I'll go through why in a bit. And we've got Nissin 4-pot calipers at the front and 320mm discs and a 240mm disc and a single piston caliper at the front. And obviously you've got the IMU control there, so you've got cornering ABS, lean sensitive traction control, and you've got rear lift mitigation to stop the rear wheel coming up when you're under heavy braking, and you get a quick shifter. So there is a lot of bike here for £11,999. So I'm going to start with the engine because we were out here in Benidorm. Feels like about a year ago. I think it might be slightly less than a year ago, but it feels like about a year ago we're out here, we're riding the CB1000 Hornet SP on the very same roads that we were riding today with some minor alterations. And the engine was and still is really a very big part of what makes the Hornet such a fantastic bike. It won the Visordown Bike of the Year award. It's all part of the engine and the combination of the engine and the way that Honda have chosen the chassis components to go with that engine. And it's still the same here. So what Honda have done for the GT version is they have boosted the mid-range torque. They've made it more rideable in the mid-range, but they haven't taken anything away from the top end. I think you only lose out on about 2 to 2.5 horsepower at the very top of the rev range over and above the Hornet. But what you get in its place is such a nice pull through the entirety of the rev range that they're sacrificing none of that delicious top end scream towards the red line, and they're giving you so much more in the mid-range, which is just absolutely brilliant. And that's all just been done through the electronics, the fuel injection system. There's no real magic happening here. It's just sensible adjustments to what they had with the CB1000 Hornet to turn it into a sports tourer. The torque delivery is super linear, and what Honda have done with the throttle connection, and if you watch Visordown you'll know that I'm normally one of the first people to moan about snappy throttle, is in all of the riding modes, I'm going to say, it is absolutely pitch perfect. The connection between you and the bike through the throttle is exactly where you would need it to be. And while we're on the subject of the engine, this thing still revs as happily, and all the way to the red line, it revs to the moon, and it just goes and goes and goes. And there were very few times today where I was sort of banging into the rev limiter, because it just goes on forever and ever and ever, and it takes you a very long time to get up there, but you're shot down the road with such urgency. It's very, very impressive that Honda have managed to do that. But then what they've also managed to do is introduce a level of refinement to the CB1000 Hornet's engine, which obviously it's going into a super naked. It's built to be exciting. It's built to engage you. What they've done is they've put that engine in this, they've fettled it and they've retuned it, and it just feels more refined, it feels classier, and it feels like you don't have to work this quite as hard to go quite as fast as you would on the Honda Hornet. Absolutely brilliant. The biggest thing that I can say about the engine really is that there's a fabulous duality to it. You can poodle through a town or a village in third or fourth gear, and the engine is as happy at those sort of speeds as it is when you get out the village, and without even touching any of the riding modes or any of the power modes, you can get straight on the throttle, open the thing up, and once it clears its throat, it is just going to behave like a sports bike should behave, which is absolutely brilliant. That duality of being able to go slow and steady and easygoing and approachable and accessible in some cases to absolute brain out lunacy is just the twist of a throttle away, which is absolutely brilliant in the sports touring segment. Moving on from the engine, I'm going to talk about the gearbox. It is super, super slick, had no issues whatsoever. The biggest plus point that I can give Honda is that they've set the quickshifter in all of the riding modes to be so precise, so direct. The blips are timed so beautifully, and the best thing of all is that you can go into the quickshifter and you've got adjustments that you can make through the TFT of the bike, and you can adjust whether you want it to be shifting harder, shifting softer, shifting more neutrally. But you can't just, it's not just on any shift, you can do that on the upshifts and the downshifts. So you can completely tailor the feel of the quickshifter to the way that you like to ride, which isn't something you can do with a lot of bikes. A lot of bikes you can just switch the quickshifter on and off, or you can go for harder shifts or softer shifts. But the fact that you can actually go in there and tailor that for upshifts and for downshifts, I think is absolutely brilliant. And today out there on the roads, no complaints with the gearbox whatsoever. And I found the slipper clutch that's on the CB1000GT to be totally unflappable. It was almost impossible. In fact, I think it was impossible. And I tried really hard to get the thing out of shape, under downshifts, holding in, going down 3 gears, dumping the clutch even when you're coming into a corner. And the bike would just sort everything out. A combination of the slipper clutch, the ERA suspension from Showa just doing its thing there without you even noticing that anything was happening. It was absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to talk about the handling. I was just mentioning the Showa ERA suspension, and I'm going to talk about it again because that is a real big move. It's a ballsy move from Honda to put a bike sub £12,000 and then drop semi-active electronically adjusted suspension on it. And they've implemented it so well on the bike. And I'm not just talking about the damping brakes. Yes, it's top class, high-tech suspension. It feels very, very plush. It gobbles up potholes, bumps and lumps with absolute aplomb. But the best thing about it is, A, the adjustability, because you can go in there and you can adjust the preload at the front and the rear, and you can tweak the settings in that way. Or if you're not so inclined to do that, you can just tell the bike what sort of load it's carrying, be it 1 person, 2 people, 1 person with luggage, 2 people with luggage, and you can adjust it that way. That's one really good point about this bike and this Showa suspension that it's got fitted to it. The other very good thing that it does is the way that it reacts, not just to the road surface, because all semi-active bikes, they detect what's going on underneath the bike and they adjust the suspension accordingly. How this reacts to the way that you're riding, because you can feel it when you're riding around town and you're pootling, or you're just going slowly or just cruising on the motorway, and it feels soft and compliant. And then when you get on a B road and you start to push on, the bike senses that and it just tenses everything up and brings it to be a much more compliant base for you to work from. It's a very impressive bit of kit that Honda haven't just taken and just bolted onto the bike. They've really, you can tell that their engineers have gone to town on fettling every single bit of that suspension system. It is very, very good. And I keep going back to the price point because there are bikes at higher price points than this in this segment that have got suspension that A, doesn't offer you that level of adjustability, and B, doesn't react in the same way that this does to the way that you're riding it. So that's another thing that is a standout feature of this bike. Another thing that is a standout feature is how sporty this feels as a sports tourer. The Honda Hornet is an absolutely fabulous naked bike. I mean, it didn't win Bike of the Year from multiple outlets and magazines and websites for no reason. It is so good for the price point, and it is so good in its own right. And this, you can almost feel the Hornet's DNA running through it. The frame is very, very closely related to that of the Honda Hornet. The subframe has been beefed up, so it's a little bit longer, and it's also got some bracing tubes in it to help reduce vibration. But you can feel that Hornet DNA. It's got the very similar sort of geometry through the frame as the Hornet, and you can feel it. And this bike feels so happy when you throw it into a fast corner and you get to really high lean angles. It just starts to get better and better and better, and it never really feels like you are pushing on too hard. You always feel like there's a bit more to give, and that's thanks to the suspension, the Nissin brakes, which are fantastic. I'm going to come on to those next, and also that engine, which just gives you exactly what you need when you need it. I did just mention the braking system, and on paper, 4-pot Nissin calipers and 320mm discs at the front might not seem like a very good braking system. It might not seem very premium, but what you've got with this is the perfect amount of bite. When you first pull on the lever, you just get such a reassuring bite on the brakes, and you get a nice bit of dive through the forks. And then as you get into the meat of the lever feel is so classy that you can just trail brake into all of the hairpin bends. Even if you've missed your braking marker by 5 or 10 meters, you can just trail brake right on the brakes, leaning on the cornering ABS right up into the apex of the corner, and just totally trust the bike. We're rolling on Michelin tyres, and there are Bridgestone options available for the CB1000GT, but we've been riding all on dry roads, fantastic road surface, and I've had absolutely no complaints on either of those whatsoever. So I'm going to go through the electronics of the bike, because as with any top spec sports tourer, there is quite a lot to talk about. I started off the day riding in the standard riding mode, and then this afternoon when we were riding back to the hotel and we were playing on some twists, I moved it up into the sport mode, and that was really just to get a feel for the two modes. I did go in and play around with the user mode as well, and I also played with the suspension settings, and I'll come on to those in a moment. From standard to sport, there isn't a massive jump in performance or dynamics. There is, you can feel it, you definitely know that it's gone up a level, but the way that I would sort of sum it up is that if the standard mode was the only mode this had and it didn't have a sports mode, I wouldn't be moaning. There is nothing wrong with the standard mode. It is quick enough, the throttle is direct enough, it's got all the power that you need in all of the right places that you need. And to be honest with you, because the riding modes dictate what the suspension settings are, unless you go into the user mode and then you can tweak them all independently, it's just as fast on a road. You're not gaining any seconds because you've gone into sports mode. It's no faster. What I enjoyed about sports mode was you got a more dynamic experience, you got more connection through the throttle, but what Honda haven't done, they haven't taken it too far. There are some bikes where you ride them all day in the road riding mode or the standard mode, and then you go up into the sport mode, and all of a sudden the thing's got this ridiculously sharp throttle and the engine character's completely changed, and that's not the case with this. It still feels as accessible, as easy to ride, as friendly and as quick in either of its top two riding modes, which is very impressive. I also enjoyed playing around with the suspension, because when we were riding in the morning, I set the suspension to be a little bit softer. I went into the user mode and set it to a much softer setting, and the bike was much more comfortable over bumps and lumps. It wasn't jarring in any way, shape or form in either of its settings, but what it did, it just had this nice soft compliant roll to it as you were getting onto the brakes and getting onto the gas. The rest of the damping, if you hit a bump or a lump, it was perfectly composed. And the same when you went the other way, really. When you stiffened everything up, it was just like you got more support when you needed it, when you were on the brakes. But then if you hit a bump or a pothole, the semi-active suspension sort of knows exactly what's going on underneath the bike, and it would rectify it. It would set the settings to what they needed to be, and it would sort them. And it does that in something like 15 milliseconds. And I didn't have a clue what 15 milliseconds was until I came on this launch. And apparently it takes you between 50 and 100 milliseconds to blink. So it is literally like having a light speed suspension engineer crawling around the bike, adjusting all the settings of the suspension as you're riding down the road, which I think is absolutely brilliant. Talking about the handling still, obviously it's a sports tourer, it's going to spend a lot of time on motorways, and we did do some motorway riding on the way back to the hotel, and I had absolutely zero issues with the stability of it whatsoever. We were riding below motorway speeds, at motorway speeds, and then quite a lot above motorway speeds, and there was no issues that I had with it. It felt stable. I knew what was going on beneath me. You know, it was absolutely all good. There were a few people, varying sizes, who sort of said that there was some bar wobble. I didn't see it myself. I didn't see it on my bike that I was riding, but I don't know if it's just their size, their weight, the way that they were sat, or the bike that they were riding. We all had panniers. We all had very similar setups in terms of the spec of the bikes and so on and so forth. But yeah, I didn't see any of that when I was riding this thing, and we were going much faster than you'd really go on your average UK motorway. I'm going to move on from the handling experience. I'm going to talk about the comfort, because just like the motorways, you are going to want to be comfortable when you're riding these things. And on that front, it's a tale of two halves. In the morning, I rode a GT that had got some extra little bits fitted to it. So it got a slightly taller screen. It also got some wind deflectors around the fairing and around your legs as well. And then this afternoon, I was riding exactly the bike that's in front of me now. So it was a stock bike with a stock screen and no wind deflectors. If you are 5'7", the extra height from the accessory screen is going to be very welcome, because I found that really good when we were riding on B roads and we were chasing the twisties. I'd have the screen on its lowest setting, and the turbulence would kind of be missing my shoulders, and my head would almost be in like a bubble of just clear air that was coming up my helmet, and there wasn't too much rumble or anything like that. When we got on the motorway, or when we got on some long stretches of dual carriageway, I'd pop the accessory screen, the taller screen, which I think is 95mm taller than the standard one, up to its highest level, and then I was in a nice bubble of still air. When I was riding the standard bike in the afternoon with the shorter screen, I found it to be quite turbulent on either of its settings. Whether it was on high, it was, you know, around the top of my head, and when it was on low, it was around my shoulders, so it was a little bit frustrating in that respect. So if you are looking at a must-have accessory for your GT and you're around about 5'7", I would recommend going for the slightly taller accessory screen that Honda offers. Other than that, I couldn't really tell the difference with the wind deflectors. Didn't make a massive amount of difference around my hips, around my legs. It might be one of those things that really comes into its own when you're riding through wet and windy and cold weather though, so it might be one to check out. Another point of the comfort that has been noted by pretty much everyone on the launch is how smooth it is. Obviously it's inline 4-cylinder engine from Honda, so it's always going to be smooth. But the way that Honda have damped the vibrations with this through the bracing through the frame is just incredible, because it feels so incredibly smooth through the foot pegs, through the handlebars and through the seat. There are basically no vibes to speak of until you get right to the top of the rev range, which is a place that you're not really going to be all that often. So that is very, very impressive. It feels like a bike you could hop on in terms of the ergonomics, the lack of vibration, and also the wind protection. If you went for that slightly taller screen, you could hop on it, ride it all day and lots more, and have absolutely zero issues whatsoever. So I'm going to move on to the verdict. You can probably tell that I'm finding it quite hard to pick fault with this bike, and it's very rare that I come away from a riding launch and there is absolutely nothing that I dislike, and it's kind of the case with this. I've got little niggles in terms of the standard screen being a bit low, a bit short on its lowest setting and not quite tall enough on its highest setting. If you're going to put the kickstand down, the kickstand is very close to the center stand and you keep catching your foot on that. It's all really super niggly stuff. I've really enjoyed riding it today, and it all comes down to that engine and the riding experience and the way that this thing handles and the way that it copes with bumps and the way that it just feels planted when you're at high lean angles and gives you so much feedback that you just feel like you can keep riding faster and faster and faster. It's genuinely impressive how well this thing performs in every situation. This genuinely feels like a bike that is trying to be a sports bike, a naked and a sports tourer all in one. It feels like you could buy it, you'd be more than happy to go out for a ride with all your mates who've got sports bikes and super nakeds, and you'd be riding this and you'd be you'd be in perfect comfort, you'd have the heated grips on, you'd have the weather protection of a sports tourer, but you'd be keeping up with them every single metre of the ride that you were on. But then when they all put their bikes in the garage and they go off and do whatever, you could go off and you could commute to work on it and be perfectly happy because it's so easy to ride, so approachable, and it's so easy going. And then you could go off touring on it with, you know, 2 people and all your luggage on the back, and you could do that as well. So it does very much feel like Honda is back in the sports touring segment with a big bang, and that is something that's very good to see. And don't think that anything that I've said, if you're somebody who doesn't like the brain out fast riding, you know, if that's not your cup of tea, don't worry, because this does all the slower stuff. It can poodle, it can, you know, you can ride this thing gently and it feels perfectly at home in any of those situations. So it's a very, very impressive bike, as you can probably tell. Well, listen, that has been enough from me out here in Benidorm. I've been Toad for Visordown. If you like the video, please hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest videos. And for all the latest news, reviews and motorcycle features, get yourself over to Visordown.